Hey, Tony, thanks for joining us today.
Hey, Lynn Marie, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
I'm doing very well. I'm very excited to see you again. We just hung out about 2 weeks ago, I think it was, at PaleoFX.
Yeah, it was almost exactly 2 weeks.
Yes, and that's how I know Tony. We were introduced by the Josh Trent at
Hmm.
PaleoFX. And Tony holds a special place in my heart because as I was getting ready today, I was, putting on the old makeup, not pretending that this is what I look like when I wake up. And I looked in the mirror, and there is a big scar still over my left eye from where Tony and I were doing some steel mace flow it on it.
Yep.
And we were flowing and flowing. We actually got this synchronized flow. Somebody recorded it. We're all proud of
You
ourselves.
got a routine.
It was beautiful. I thought it was, like next when synchronized steel mace flow becomes an Olympic sport, we're there, Tony.
Hey, yeah.
But I got a little overzealous afterward, and Tony's sitting down doing something else, and I decide I'm just gonna free flow for a minute. The music's going,
Mhm.
I'm flowing, and suddenly I whap myself in the head with the butt end of the mace, like not the ball end, if you've seen a steel mace, with the end that's sharper. And I was like, oh, I'm so embarrassed. Like, Aubrey Marcus is here. He started this
Yep.
gym. Like, oh, this girl just whacking herself in the head. So I just kept flowing. Then I realized, oh my God, there's like blood running down my face. And I just felt something warm, and I was like, well, this can't be
Oh
good. And I
no.
touched my face, and then I like run over to Tony, and I'm like, Tony, Tony. I just cracked my face open. And
And that's when it got real.
yes. Because you're just like playing on your phone, and then you look up, you're like, oh, oh.
I'm like, oh, wait, what's happening now? You just got maced by who?
Yeah, exactly. When I tore my ACL in capoeira, everybody's like, "Oh, who are you playing against?" I'm like, "Nope, I was doing a
Mhm.
solo." So almost every time I get really injured, just myself. Metaphor for
You
life,
might
kids.
say quitting while you're ahead might be a good thing
I
to
should
think about.
have. I should have. I like that's the second I whacked myself in the head. I thought like, man, I should have just stopped when Tony and I had just successfully recorded.
Every time.
Every time, right? And then Tony, who, I barely know at this point, we've known each other a few days. I'm like, you're coming into the women's restroom with me to help me glue my face back together. And he was a magnificent sport.
I have no idea what the poor girls at the front desk thought about the whole situation.
But they were like, hey, I mean, cheers to On It for having the most well stocked first aid kit I've ever
Oh
seen.
yeah, butterfly bandages, the works.
Right, right.
Glue,
I mean,
face glue.
face glue. I glued my face back together. I was thinking like, oh my god, urgent care, emergency room. This
Mm.
is this is gonna ruin my trip to Austin. And then like 5 minutes later, I was glued back together, and
No one was the wiser
no one was the wiser. Aubrey Marcus has no idea.
until now.
Until then, I'm sure he's listening to this
He's listening right now. He's
podcast.
like, "What?"
Who dat? What's happening? Amazing. So Tony, I'm stoked to have you on. We chatted
Yeah.
a little bit beforehand. You have a history, a varied history, a varied relationship with quitting.
I
And
do.
so, yes, if you could take us back to your high school years when
Right.
quitting meant one thing to you. Let's go back there.
Yep. Yeah. So I'll give you the quick and dirty version. When I was younger, I was not the best at sports, but I certainly was involved in sports and various activities like that. Um, and one in particular that I really wanted to sign up for and asked my parents if I could do was karate. So I signed up for karate, and I'm going through the belts, and you go from white belt to green belt, et cetera. You're breaking boards, you're doing katas, you're having fun. But then at some point, specifically when I was at the recommended black belt level, which means I was one step away from getting a black belt, I decided I just didn't want to do it anymore, and I quit. The next thing that looked similar to that was when I signed up for freshman football. I went through the whole summer training camp program, the weightlifting program, did the whole thing, signed up for football. Uh, when we so the first couple weeks of practice were just more conditioning and everything. As soon as we got into the pads and as soon as we actually started doing the game, I was like, I quit. Then I frankly did the same thing for high school itself, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior year, halfway through senior year, I quit regular high school, signed up at a community college, finished out, didn't walk with my class, didn't graduate with my class, basically quit high school. Still got my diploma, of course. So I was very quick to quit when I was younger.
And what was the impetus for those quits?
Well, at the time, I wasn't very introspective. I think, as many young people in general are, you just kind of live. You just kind of going from moment to moment. Maybe impulsive would be the word. And at that time, I just was like, I don't feel like doing this anymore. This is hard. But even then, even in that unconscious, kind of immature state, something about those things didn't sit well, in the sense that I felt like I had sold myself short. I guess the real feeling was some regret, but I didn't really know why. I hadn't really unpacked it. And it wasn't until many years later that I started to kind of get that greater insight. But at the time, it was like, I just don't feel like doing this anymore. I'm going to quit.
Did you have any feedback from the people around you questioning these
You
quits?
know, it's funny because in retrospect, I would think that my parents would have maybe pushed back a little bit more, because, certainly they had invested, like, for example, karate, like they had invested money in driving me to practice multiple days a week. And I would have thought that they would have wanted me to go all the way, but I guess they just didn't really care that much about it either. And we're kind of like, well, whatever, I guess we don't have to take them to practice anymore. And so what? So no, like I actually didn't have, and maybe that's part of it. Like I didn't have a lot of people telling me to not quit. I guess my football coach was pretty upset when I told him that I was quitting, and I just was like, well, I'm quitting, so it doesn't really matter what you say. But no, I didn't really have anybody chiming in on that, which I never really even thought about that. So it's kind of funny. I don't know why.
Well, it's
Maybe
interesting.
they
And
didn't
and
expect
once,
much.
what'd you say?
Maybe they didn't expect much from me. I don't know.
Well, once we get to a later part in the story, I would definitely love to go
Right.
back and examine that whole the relationship between, I mean, right now when we're talking about it and you're talking about, well, I had regrets and nobody ever asked me, why are you quitting this and that? Some people could think, well, that they did you a disservice. I'm going to go ahead and give the counterpoint to that, because I think,
Mm,
my parents did the same. They never asked me why I was quitting a thing, which to me gave me a lot of self confidence in my choices.
mm,
And it later in life, by the way, I was like, we'll talk about this later. I'm like, I'm just gonna talk about this now. Well, later in life, if I was gonna quit something, I would not think like I need to run this by my parents. I need to run this by a person.
right.
It had been established early in life that if I feel the need
Mm,
to quit a thing, whether or not maybe it's premature, like you were saying in your instance, or impulsive, I think that's part of what made it my superpower. And so maybe that
mm.
comes up later in your story, but we'll see. We'll see. We have
Okay,
not
we'll find
gotten
out.
to that chapter yet. So when did things change for you?
So I had a big life turning point in my late college years. I think I might have been maybe 2 years before graduating college. And basically, I had hit my own personal rock bottom. I wasn't taking care of my health. I was staying up late. I was mixed up with a bad crowd, kind of the usual stuff that people do when they move away from home and have no boundaries and no restrictions, and are just kind of free to make all the bad choices that they've always wanted to make. And then you realize that all these bad choices have bad consequences. Well, that brought me to my own personal breaking point. Um, Recovering from that place, which took a lot of surrender and a lot of reaching out and actually having willingness to ask for help. I actually moved back home during that time. So it's pretty serious. Like I would actually characterize it as a spiritual crisis, and a lot of it, and what set it off was the death of a close friend. So that was really like the straw that broke the camel's back. So I wasn't taking care of myself for years. I was already in a dark place, and then this, kind of tragic thing happened, and then that was it. But coming out of that, and thankfully I did come out of that, is when I really first began to have an appreciation for the mystery of life, and that there's more than meets the eye, and that I don't, as an 18, 19-year-old man, have all the answers. Imagine that. I didn't know it all. But there is an openness, really, for the first time, and a willingness to do the self-examination for the very first time. And that actually came out of finally taking my mom up on her suggestion that I should try doing some yoga. So I think with that physical self-awareness of like, oh, I'm holding all this tension here, I'm tight here, and then how that connected to emotional holdings, and actually just having that perception of what was going on in my internal environment, that was really the first time that I became aware of my thought process. And that also coincided with getting involved in the fitness industry. It's when I was studying fitness and wellness in college. It's when I took my first job at a gym. And that was really the turning point where I went from being a real quick quick to quit to being, I'm going to commit, because I was like, you know what? It's like that Seinfeld episode where George says, I just need to do the opposite of everything that I normally do. And then that's pretty much what I did, where it was like, all right, what did old Tony do? Well, I'm going to do the opposite. So old Tony used to quit, so now I'm going to commit. So it was about that 18, 19, 20-year-old range where I made that flip to, yes, I'm going to stick to things. And I did. I stuck to being a personal trainer for a decade.
Wow. And so, in that stick to itiveness that you developed,
Mhm.
were there times where you felt like you wanted to quit, but you said, no, 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 that's what old Tony would do? New Tony stays with
Yep.
things, hell or high water.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, and I would say one really big expression of that was when I got the opportunity to write a book. So I was contacted by a publisher, and this was something that came about due to my involvement with Paleo Magazine. I was a writer for them, hosted the Paleo Magazine podcast for many years. This was all concurrent with being a personal trainer, a fitness center manager. So like what I was saying about flipping the switch and going into commitment land, like I really was taking on a lot of different things, and I was just like, bring it on. More is better. I can do it all. Like, oh, I'll work full time. Oh yeah, I'll have a side job. Oh, you've got a book deal? Heck yeah, I'm going to write a book. So they wanted me to do a cookbook about paleo. I suggested paleo grilling. We went through the development process. Ultimately, it got okayed. At the same time, Paleo Magazine had contacted me to do another writing project. And you might be able to guess, what do you think I said?
Yes. No.
I did. I
Yeah.
said, yes, I'm going to do both of them. So I basically took on two major book writing projects at the same time, and it was basically hell. So that summer, I worked full time. I podcasted and wrote for Paleo Magazine. I maintained my relationship with my wife such that we're still married. So just bare minimum, kept my own stuff together. And any amount of free time that I had, I was writing. I was either writing the Paleo Magazine book or I was writing the Paleo Grilling book. And it was just one of those things where I realized that it's hard, but that doesn't mean that you need to stop. Um, that discomfort is part of the process, that you're not going to feel good the whole time. There's honeymoon phases where you're really excited that you got the deal. It's like when you first meet somebody and you're super, super stoked that the relationship is fresh and new and exciting. And then that wanes and then you're in it. And then, well, how do you navigate being in it? Well, you show up every day. It's hard every day, but you can get through it every day. And that was really kind of the main lesson of that phase. And going through that writing, that book writing hell of a summer, I finished both of them. I got the Paleo Magazine book done. It ended up doing very well and actually is what helped my wife and I buy our house. So that ended up being a huge boon just to our overall lifestyles. The Paleo Grilling book opened up tons of really cool opportunities for me to do things like go on TV shows and fly up to New York and do interviews and things that I would never have done before. And so it was a great lesson in sticking to something all the way to the end, and being able to reap those rewards that were not immediate term, to get those long term, to plant the seeds and then to be patient enough to actually gather the harvest when it was time.
I like that a lot because it's the difference between, somebody asked me this on a podcast yesterday. So are you saying anytime something is stressful, you should quit? And I was like, absolutely not. Things that you love, that you're passionate about, are going to be stressful at some point in time. That's just the
Right.
nature of it. Like you said, you love doing this writing, or you were passionate about paleo at the time, but it
Absolutely.
doesn't make writing two books at the same time easy. There's
No.
still a stress that's there, right? But it's not a
Right.
stress that says you should quit this thing. It's just
Right.
like part of the process. I love that you said discomfort is part of the process, which is true with anything. I mean, I would love to have somebody give me an example of like, I found my passion, I went to pursue it, and there was zero discomfort anywhere in it. Like,
It's just
that's
super easy and it's always fun.
right. That sounds very unlikely to me. So I appreciate that you brought that out of your story, is that like, yeah, that I went through it and I was doing a bunch of things I love, but it was still
Hmm.
hard. But I still stuck with it because there are different types of hard. There's a type of hard that's out of alignment with you that says maybe you should quit, and there's a type of hard that's just part of the process.
Right.
Love that. So Now we have Tony has gone from king of the bailing, like I leave everything,
Chronic quitter.
chronic quitter, a chronic giver upper,
Yep.
to overcommitter. How did you
Yep.
finally reach a point where you realized you needed balance?
Well, interesting that you ask, because the same process that really led me to kind of coming out of my darkest place when I was a young man ultimately is what got me out of that second crisis of overcommitment, because what I found myself in was a situation where I was on an existential treadmill that was set to like 10 miles an hour, and every day at 4:30 in the morning the alarm would go off. I would get up and it was go time, and it was get ready to see my first client of the day. That might be as early as 5 a.m. or 5:30 a.m., which also meant getting the gym open and started and all the group exercise rooms prepped. Going through a full day training, working, doing the gym stuff, coming home, writing, doing my podcast interviews, editing podcasts, maybe have some food, chit chat with my wife a little bit, do some more work. It was just every single day. And it was like this, almost like a Groundhog Day kind of thing. But it was a Groundhog Day that I knew that I couldn't keep up. And the reason why is because that same self-awareness, that seed of self-awareness that started back when I was 18, 19, 20, somewhere around there, I was able to refresh that and realize that, wait a minute, it's not just a matter of quitting something or committing to something. It's about, what am I really trying to achieve in my life? What is the real big picture goal? And the real big picture goal is that I want to be happy, that I want to feel satisfied, and I want to feel really just that I'm in alignment with myself, and that I had taken on too much. And that if we look at like a natural model, or if we look at like nature as a guide, for example, nature doesn't just grow. In nature, if something grows, that's cancer. That's out of control. That's a population boom that's about to crash. It's actually not sustainable. So natural cycles involve growth as well as pruning. And I just got to this point where I realized that if I was truly being honest with myself, it was time for a pruning. And so, the experience with physical exercise, like you were saying before, knowing the difference between discomfort and pain is really important. And I had crossed the threshold existentially and in my overall life from discomfort to pain. Now it was actually something where it wasn't just a matter of just change my mindset, think about it differently, like, it's just, I need to be more positive or whatever. It's like, no, this situation actually needs to change.
Ooh, I love the growth versus the pruning. It's not a way I had ever thought about things, but you're right. There are periods of times, I'm looking at myself and I'm looking at other entrepreneurs that I know, where we can, do the proverbial hustle, but at some point you start to hit the wall and you need that like restorative phase.
Right.
And you can call it pruning, or just, like in exercise terms, your recovery phase. But it's important,
exactly,
because you are going to burn out if you never stop and scale back for a bit. And I think that you just bringing that up is probably going to give a lot of people pause, and you probably just gave a lot of people permission to take a day off, or to start making some boundaries. Like, you had said yes to everything, and they might think like, oh, hey, I said yes to everything for a while. And especially at the beginning of your entrepreneurial journey, you do that, right? You never know when that thing that you say yes to is going to be the thing that makes the difference.
Right.
But at that, there's a tipping point at which you realize there are diminishing returns from some of those yeses, and there's a lot of stress on you that will eventually kind of work its way into having negative effects on the yeses you should say yes to, that will have an effect. And that's not great for your outcome. So how did you make that transition?
Well, so what that ended up looking like was, several years prior, I had, and this is kind of getting into a new phase of quitting. This is more like the strategic quit. When I was working, it seems like you're a fan of that.
Because I am doing like the champion. He can see me, and most of you can't. But yes, big fan of.
So I'd read the book 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss. We got some more dance moves off of that.
Sorry, did he both say strategic quitting and Tim Ferriss in the same paragraph?
Did we drop that in the same line?
Love. Okay.
So when I was working as a personal trainer, I was maybe like 5, 6 years. I was maybe like 5 years into it at a certain point when I realized, especially after reading the 4 Hour Work Week, that I had been going along with a paradigm that did not afford me with the opportunities that I felt I could have. Not that I should have. I don't feel like I'm owed anything, but that I could have if I set myself up right and if I play my cards right. And namely, working as a personal trainer, you're trading time for dollars, your own physical time, as well as your own personhood. So it's like your physical presence and energy is required in order to make money. And that's great when you're young and energetic and like the passion's running hot. But as you get a little bit older, you get a few injuries under your belt. I'd had a back injury by then. Just your energy levels get a little bit more tapped because you've been going so strong. I realized that I needed to start planting some seeds and setting myself up for something else, just to expose myself to some different possibilities. And so what I did was I started a blog. So the way that I ultimately quit was to start things. So I started a blog. I started to get connected with people in the nascent paleo community on Facebook and on message boards, things like Paleo Hacks. I started going to paleo events, like the very first Paleo Effects, started writing for Paleo Magazine. So all these things were kind of building. And I was doing all this stuff in conjunction with working as a personal trainer. And all of that stuff led me to that second breaking point where I felt like I was on the hamster wheel, where I felt like I'd gone from discomfort into pain. But because I had been planting those seeds for years, I had sown my own escape. I'd sown the seeds for my own escape. So right when I had kind of gotten to the point where I was like, I don't know if I can do this anymore, I actually went to another Paleo FX event. And as I was walking around the expo area, I ran into Joe Rakowski and Justin Quinn, who are the founders of Natural Force. I'd written an article for them several years prior for Paleo Magazine, so we'd had some contact. Just basically stopped by the booth to say, what's up? You know how Paleo FX is. Everyone's just chit-chatting. It's just basically one conversation and then another conversation and another conversation. After Paleo FX was over, we stayed in touch. A few emails went back and forth. And lo and behold, they offered me a job. So I was looking at the known, the painful known, which was working at least 12 hours a day, working at least 3 different jobs, being on the hamster wheel, making good money, but feeling like at any moment the whole thing could fall apart. The whole house of cards was trembling. Or I could take the unknown. And that was really the decision. Stick with the known pain or the unknown possibility. It wasn't easy going through that process. I think, again, had to really tap the self-awareness bit. I don't necessarily have like a formal meditation practice. I like to maybe breathe from time to time, to just move mindfully from time to time, to quiet my mind in various ways, but it's not a structured thing necessarily. And it was through that I realized that my motivation for sticking with the known pain would be a fear-based, scarcity-based motivation. The fears were irrational, and that if I were to pass on this opportunity to try something new, something that I had literally been preparing for and planning for with my blogging and my Paleo Magazine and my going to events and all that stuff for years and years, like this was the thing that I'd actually been asking for this whole time. So if given the thing that you've been asking for, what do you say? Do you say no at that point? Well, are you going to get that opportunity again? I don't know. Maybe, maybe not. So I was actually riding my bike around the neighborhood. I feel like physical exercise has always been a real boon just to my life, not just from a health and body standpoint, from a mental, spiritual, psychological standpoint. And I decided I'm gonna make the leap, and I did. So I quit everything. I quit my fitness management job, where I was the director of fitness, #1 personal trainer, manager of the facility. I quit Paleo Magazine, where I was writing multiple articles for every issue. I quit hosting the Paleo Magazine podcast, which I did. Sometimes I did 2 episodes a week, where we would do like a full episode and a mini episode. So I quit all of that stuff. I did it in a way that was respectful and mindful of my responsibilities. So I told everybody in advance. I prepared a succession plan. I, either provided enough articles or podcasts to make sure that the team over at Paleo Magazine was able to find a replacement. I helped train the replacement for Paleo Magazine. I helped train my replacement at the country club where the fitness center was located. And so that was part of it. I know I need to quit. I'm not going to bail though, which is what I did when I was a teenager. I ghosted people back then. This time it was, I need to do this for myself, but that doesn't mean I need to burn bridges. That doesn't mean that I need to be disrespectful. So that's kind of what that looked like. It was get that self-awareness, put a plan into action, and take a leap of faith based on a calm, mindful assessment of the real risks and benefits.
I love this. I totally forgot when we were hanging out at PaleoFX to give you a copy of my book, and yet you just essentially like gave us the how to quit chapter, which is
Nice.
so. I mean, you dead on said it. You don't burn bridges. You don't leave people hanging. You
Right.
prepare your whoever's going to succeed, and that way people like you run into them again at PaleoFX, and there's no hard feelings all over the place. You know, oh Tony, he
Exactly.
went and he knew he had to go on to a next chapter. And what's awesome about the paleo space or the personal development space is that I think more than average people understand that.
Right.
You know, I think in corporate America, I mean, not that I was working in corporate America, I was working in the Department of Defense, but when I told my boss I was quitting last week, the look on her face did not say, clearly you need to move on into another chapter. But in the personal development space, I think everybody understands, like, hey, we all have our times and our seasons, and it's time for Tony to move on. And you did it in a beautiful way. I love that. And you also brought up something else so people ask me, many questions all the time. One is often the one that you just addressed. How do I quit? Well, just like Tony did, give people notice, prepare them. And then secondly, you said, okay, I've got this thing that is a known entity and it's causing me pain. The next thing is unknown. It sounds great, right? But so did probably everything that you were going to, fitness training sounded great. And Paleo Magazine sounded like everything, right? Like you said, there's the honeymoon phase. Everything sounds great at some point. You're like, I'm going to make this leap. What people always ask me is, how do I know the next thing is going to be better? And the answer is you don't.
No.
No, but what you do know is the pain that you don't want. And
Right.
that to me, and I think obviously in your situation too, is enough. Granted, you were given an opportunity that sounded, very much like in line, like the universe just like, we've seen what you've been doing, Tony. Here's a beautiful opportunity.
Did feel a little bit like that. So that was part of why I shouldn't look this gift horse in the mouth. Like I might have some like karmic repercussions if I say no right now.
Exactly. But even if it hadn't been so perfect, you knew you were already in pain and you needed to make a change. So say you make this change and it's not amazing, guess what you get to do? You get to make another one, right? Like,
Exactly.
And it's not a series of bailings like you were talking about from high school. It's a series of strategically thought out, hey, this is when the honeymoon phase is over and there's discomfort, and the discomfort has turned into pain, and that's probably having some negative effects on either your health or your relationships. And then it's time to move on again if that thing doesn't work. It's not a matter of like, okay, I'm only going to quit if the next thing is 100% sure to be better, because there are no 100% sures in this world.
No.
What is 100% sure to you at that point was that you were in pain, though.
Yep.
So you move to the next thing and you have some faith, right? You have faith that everything you've been working toward is going to, and your self-awareness that you've been cultivating and all this personal development is going to pay off. Such a beautiful lesson, Tony. I love this. So,
Well, and I will say,
yes.
I'm 2.5 years into my new position with Natural Force. I guess it's not new, 2.5 years in, but it did end up working out.
Yes, I'm glad you added that. Everybody's like, did he love the next thing? But that's right. Only
I'm
I know.
still doing it.
You're still doing it. Yes. And what did it feel like for you when you kind of shed all those other things and you got to take a breath and try this new thing?
Well, so it's funny is that the hardest part is being undecided. The hardest part is 1 foot in and 1 foot out. And that's actually the most painful part. Being in a thing that I didn't really want to be doing, that was uncomfortable. Fantasizing about things that I would like to do, that's fun. But when I was actually presented with that opportunity and I actually had a path, I had, like, as Robert Frost says, the two roads diverged, and you have to pick one. That's the real crisis. However, as soon as I made the decision and picked one, which is, you know what, I'm going to put these things aside and I'm going to take on this new thing, total relief. It was just, you can breathe, the weight's off your shoulders. It was a total relief, a total release, and without any shadow of a doubt, an immediate awareness that was 100% the right decision. Not necessarily that the outcome was predictable, but that it was the right decision for me at that time, and that whatever would follow from that decision, I would take as it came. But tremendous relief would be the way to describe the feeling of deciding to make that quit happen.
Which is so beautiful because we have the exact thing to compare it to before from high school where you would quit and you'd have regret.
Yep, exactly.
And so very often I say to people when they're trying to decide whether or not they should quit something, I say quit in your head. Just tell yourself you're going to quit. And then do you instantly feel relief or do you instantly feel regret? And then, before you've actually gone in and given your 2 weeks notice or you've gotten a divorce or whatever, make that quit in your head and just check in with yourself and see how you feel. So I love that you felt that relief because you had such a stark difference between the bailing of yesteryear and Tony making a strategic quit.
Hashtag no regrets.
Hashtag no regrets. Tony, this has been totally delightful. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing your story with us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. Where can people find you and Natural Force?
So naturalforce.com is the place for all things Natural Force. We specialize in clean proteins like grass-fed collagen peptides and quality fats like organic MCT oil. We actually have a really cool keto coffee creamer that just came out, as well as a clean coffee that's a toxin-free, pesticide-free, organic, single origin, Colombian coffee that is amazingly delicious, which I should definitely get you some to try. If you're a coffee drinker, don't want to assume. Some people don't. I don't know.
Well, do you have to make espresso?
We're working on tea as well, so there's some other options. But naturalforce.com for all things Natural Force. I'd love to put something together for your audience for you to include in your show notes. So we'll get a little special deal. We might actually be able to get people some free clean coffee if that might be something your listeners are interested in. If they're not ready to quit coffee just yet.
Yeah, exactly. Like our buddy Josh Trent. No, that would be amazing.
If the listeners want to go to your show notes, we'll afterwards get something together in a nice little package that they can easily access. And so naturalforce.com, and then My Natural Force is all of our social media. And then for me personally, I'm Tony Fed Fitness on Instagram is probably the best place to find me. I did actually let my old blog that I started like way back at the beginning of this whole process, I just let it like expire and like my GoDaddy like domains expire and stuff. So I actually quit my own personal website. So there's none of that. But Instagram at Tony Fed Fitness is the best way to find me personally, and then naturalforce.com or My Natural Force for everything else.
Very cool, Tony. Thanks again for being on.
Thank you so much for having me, Lynn Marie. Have a great day.
Absolutely. You too. And for everybody else out there, until next time, happy quitting.